folks, gather round for this very exciting occasion. So for those of you who don't know, my name is David Mitchell. I'm the mayor of the town of Bridgewater, and I am super excited to be here. I know this has been a long time coming. We wanted to do this many years ago. There's some complications. You can all call the province and your MLA and get them to update the traffic standards. That makes it so these aren't illegal. But, you know, between Steve and our staff, we found a solution on, you know, a very busy intersection, very highly prominent, which is what we want to. But I just want to convey that this is more than just, you know, painting some colors on the road. You all know that. It's the town's way of publicly demonstrating to everyone that this is a safe, respectful, inclusive community where everyone deserves to be treated with love. And I know for many of you it doesn't feel like that. So I fielded a few calls. Why are you doing this? Why are you spending the money? Well, because some people don't have the luxury of just walking around being exactly who they want to be, a full, true expression of themselves without someone judging, hurting them. We don't have to go down all, you know. So this is just a small thing that the town can do to express that this is everyone's community, regardless of who you are, how you identify, whatever it is. This is your community. And so we are privileged to be able to do this. So I do want to thank Lunenburg Pride and our staff team for working together, and I look forward to the parade that's coming next month, our first Pride Parade. Town Council will be there with all of you, and so, you know, better things are ahead. And I'll turn it over to you.
Jeez, now I gotta try not to cry. Thank you. No, I mean, like you said, this is it's a small gesture in the grand scheme of things, but it really means a lot more than just paint on a road. I know people here are part of the LGBTQ plus community. There are allies here, and the climate that we're currently living in, where there is a lot of vitriol and attacks on LGBTQ folks, especially trans people and drag queens, you know, especially when we have the events in Bridgewater next month, this will show to them that it's more than just paint. You know, this is a town that is welcome and inclusive to anyone, no matter the minority that comes out and tries to speak out against us, because, you know, we're not going anywhere. And it truly means a lot to me that we've worked through all the ups and downs with the rules and found a way to make it work, because it's so important that we have a crosswalk in Bridgewater, especially now that Bridgewater is growing and it's going to grow in the coming years. So I just want to thank everyone who came out, and this is wonderful that it happens to be in place before Pride Week next month. So I hope that anytime you're around here, whether it's during Pride Week or not, that you'll remember this very important day, and, you know, we will just keep staying positive despite all the reasons we have not to be. So thanks, everybody.
Right, I will call this regularly scheduled meeting of Bridgewater Town Council to order. And as always, the town of Bridgewater is located in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and it is our privilege to be here. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, motion to approve the agenda is circulated. Moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Caldwell. All those in favor? Those opposed, motion is carried. Announcements from members of council. Anything that you've done in the last little while or that upcoming? Councillor Thurman, just don't forget to push your button on your microphone.
Oh, gee, and I'm the one that started. We've got an item on here, 9.9 for a volunteer thing. I can talk about that at that point in time. Would that
Perfect.
be okay?
Yes, fantastic. Yep.
Great, thanks.
Yep. I know that this past weekend was very eventful in the town of Bridgewater. We had the South Shore Sustainability Symposium at the Nova Scotia Community College, very well attended over the couple of days. So I know lots of people found a lot of benefit in that. We had the Multicultural Association had a newcomers event at HB Studios. Of course, we had the grand opening of Bridgewater Ready Mix, and then we had the home opener of the Lumberjacks, and of course in the evening we had the Harvest Moon Festival with 3 or 4 hours of music, local music, and then the fireworks that were postponed from Canada Day, which were really well received. I think people really enjoyed having the fireworks at 8:30 instead of 10:30. When I spoke to some folks, especially with younger kids, that either they have to miss them on Canada Day because they're later, or they attempt to go down, and any of us with little ones know that at that hour it can be a challenge. So I had heard a lot of comments from people saying, this is a great time of year to do fireworks. So just something to maybe think about. Any other events? I know a week today, on Monday, we have there's a Truth and Reconciliation event happening at Bijanuiska Park. There will be details shared on social media as we progress through the week, but just a notice that the event that will be in the town of Bridgewater will be on Monday, giving people an opportunity to attend the various other events around the region that will be taking place over that weekend. So stay tuned for more information. Don't think we have any delegations, so we are right down to reports and recommendations. So we have an intermunicipal agreement for a regional anti-racism and anti-discrimination committee. As council knows, a number of years ago, Bridgewater formed the Anti-Racism Task Force, and a number of other municipalities also formed one. And then as we all worked together, we realized two things. Of course, issues do not stop at municipal borders, and so it made sense to do it on a regional level. But also, this work really requires a level of expertise that made it very challenging to put that on volunteers, especially volunteers who have lived experience with discrimination and racism, and then asking them to also try to help people through those events was a lot. And so it really required us to make sure we had a staff person that had adequate training on that. So that now brings us to this, and I'll turn it over to the CAO to go through.
Okay, so at the March 13th, 2023 council meeting, council did approve a terms of reference that established a regional anti-racism and anti-discrimination advisory committee, and made a commitment to fund a regional coordinator for a term of 24 months to support the committee, with the town's funding being $13,425 for the 2023-24 fiscal year. And direction was given to myself to assist in the development of an agreement that would outline the terms of this regional initiative. So what you have tonight is that intermunicipal regional agreement, and that is titled the Intermunicipal Regional Anti-Racism and Diversity Agreement. So the agreement essentially sets out some basic terms, which should be fairly familiar to you, because they're quite common in a lot of our regional intermunicipal agreements. So it sets out that the partnership is with the municipalities in Lunenburg County, so all 5, The purpose is to provide for coordinated anti-racism and diversity services. The District of Chester is the host municipality, so the District of Chester will provide the office space and will be the employer. So they'll provide the staff resource, the coordinator, the regional coordinator, to support the committee. Establishes the committee in the terms of reference, as which I mentioned were previously approved by council, and establishes the anti-racism and diversity coordinator, and notes that it's a term position ending March 31st, 2026, at which time the units will reevaluate and determine whether we continue. It also establishes that there will be quarterly check-ins between the coordinator and the CAOs, and it sets out the cost-sharing formula. So you can see the town of Bridgewater is 12.35%, and the cost-sharing formula is based on uniform assessment. So each unit's percentage of the total uniform assessment for Lunenburg County. Budgets are recommended to the CAOs by February 1st, and of course those will be brought forward to council. And the agreement expires April 1st, 2026, but can be extended upon mutual agreement of the parties. And if there's any disagreements, the standard process is in place, which is arbitration. So the town has included in the 23-24 budget $20,000 for this initiative, so there is sufficient funding in place to fund the coordinator this year.
All right, any questions from council? We've discussed this a few times as we got ourselves to here. Hearing none, is someone prepared to make a motion? Councilor Caldwell.
Move that the town council for the town of Bridgewater approve the terms of the intermunicipal regional anti-racism and diversity agreement as identified in document 23-005C and authorize the execution of same by the mayor and municipal clerk.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor McDonald. Further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. 9.2 is amendments to Policy 77, grants to organizations for tiny shelters. And we're going to be giving notice, but I welcome Megan to our new location for our podium. Just in case some people are watching online and going, I don't know where they are this week. We are back in council chambers. It's had its first renovation in certainly the many, many years that I've been here. And now I don't know where to look for the camera. So I'm just looking all over, but anyway, so welcome, Megan. You get to be the first person at the podium.
Thank you. Quite an honor. So I am here today to talk about the Tiny Shelter Grant. So that is part of Policy 77, grants to organizations. And some of the background related to this is that at the end of August of this year, there was 123 households experiencing homelessness in our region, so that includes Bridgewater and our surrounding areas, and we have those numbers from the data being collected by SODA. And then last year, Council approved amendments to the Grants to Organization Policy 77 to include grants for tiny shelters. So these were intended for organizations in town to put up little shelters, similar to the ones that are at the Catholic Church presently, as an kind of immediate stopgap measure to support people experiencing homelessness in our area. So that was originally approved in November of last year, and amendments were made in January of this year. Since then, no organizations have applied to build a tiny shelter in town. So we wanted to investigate a little bit more about why that was and what we might be able to do for next steps. So I just also wanted to call attention to the growing number of people experiencing homelessness in our area. The Social Open Doors Association, SODA, put out some numbers comparing last August to this August, showing that at that time last year there were 83 households experiencing homelessness, which has increased to 123. And so we're seeing a trend in the not positive direction. So I think the opportunity to do something to address this is ever present. So in August and September of this year, I spoke with Souls Harbor Rescue Mission, St. Joseph's Church, who was host to the two existing tiny shelters, the Interchurch Council, the United Way, and SODA to get a better understanding of if they're familiar with the grant, what's maybe holding them back from implementing a tiny shelter. And some of the things that I heard were that none of them were intending to use this grant to build a tiny shelter in town. Some of the challenges that were noted include a lack of supports for mental health, washrooms, food preparation facilities, and things like that. The cost of insurance was noted as a barrier for nonprofits to bear, and staff and volunteer capacity to operate the tiny shelters. So the people who are living in the existing ones require a level of support that the operators aren't always able to provide. And living in a tiny shelter can be isolating, stigmatizing, and it's not really seen as kind of the best housing option for people who are experiencing homelessness. So based on what we've heard so far, the recommendation is to remove the tiny shelter grant from Policy 77 to then be able to earmark that budget to support people experiencing homelessness in a different way. And the idea being with that is that we could work collectively with the social service organizations in town who are doing direct frontline work to bring another recommendation to council for how we would best use those funds. So there's about $15,000 earmarked for that, and we would work collaboratively with the nonprofits to bring an idea back to council for what we might be able to do to address homelessness in our area. And then also engage MODL for ongoing collaboration. And I'll note that last fiscal year they did dedicate $15,000 as well to go towards the tiny shelter grant. I have been in touch with them, and that was a one-time funding allocation, so it's not ongoing for this year, but I think there's an opportunity for us to continue that conversation.
Any questions from council? I know I spoke to an organization that mentioned you mentioned insurance, and they had hinted, this organization had hinted that another organization was all set to themselves put up a couple of tiny shelters, and they made a quick phone call to their insurer and found out it was like well over $10,000, which is whatever, we can talk about that. But so we talk about barriers. There's just, you know, we normally think of, well, there's the physical housing, then of course there are the lack of supports, and we've talked around this table about the lack of mental health supports in this community for years. But then I never had thought of insurance until, like I said, this individual said there was an organization that was looking seriously at this, and it kind of came off the rails because of that. So I'm glad that it's on your radar to look at. So thank you. Any other comments? So what we're doing is we're giving notice of our intention at a future meeting to make amendments to the policy. Is someone prepared to make that motion? Councillor Thorburn?
I would move that town council of Bridgewater give notice of intention to amend policy 77 grant organization by removing all references to tiny shelter from the policy at the October 10th meeting, 2023 of town council, and that council direct staff to investigate all approaches to support expansion, homelessness, and housing insecurity of the Port Capital.
Thank you. We have to remember to put, we're dealing with new microphone systems here, so we just have to remember to press the button for the microphones. So moved by Councillor Thorburn that we give notice to the October 10th meeting. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Down to 9.3, permanent financing, debenture issuance.
So this report is just kind of a follow-up. Every year council approves our borrowing list of projects that we're going to finance, and this is actually as a result of Municipal Finance Corporation sending out, hey, it's fall debenture season, and then we have to go through our list of capital projects that are completed and bring that to council for approval to actually put the financing in place. So there's a list of five capital projects here. And those are the exit 12A interchange, so every year we're contributing to the cost of that project. While not complete, that one we're financing as we go because it's significant in dollar amounts. We have some fire equipment, the town-owned decorative lighting, the clarifier at the wastewater treatment plant, and the bucket truck, which was purchased in the last year as well. So those are all projects that we completed, that we had planned to borrow for, and we are putting that in place, hopefully with Municipal Finance Corporation as they go through their process. So there's a couple of things there to note. It just be the term of those borrowings, so you're going to see different terms. And we try to match up the life of the equipment with the term of the borrowing. So we obviously, for things wastewater related and exit 12A that have a really long life, much longer than the 15 years. Other things like a bucket truck that we actually ended up purchasing used instead of new, we have to only finance that over its remaining life. So that's the reason for that. And one other thing to note, which you might have read, was that the maximum interest rate that is in this request is 6.5%. Municipal Finance Corporation doesn't know when it's going to issue the debenture what the interest rate will be. However, if council doesn't approve up to 6.5% and for some reason it happened to come in higher, their debenture issue would fail. So they always like to make sure that it's plenty high. The last time it was, on the average of 4%. So I'm not expecting it to come in at 6.5, but we don't know until that debenture is in process. So I also included what the interest and principal payments would be at the 6.5%. Again, we're not expecting the interest to be quite that high, but we won't know until that's finalized. So what this does is it permits us to finance these assets now, and go through that process. We do have the option to wait till the spring debenture issue, but what happens is if the asset was completed more than 12 months before, then we can only borrow 90% of the asset value. So, we can prolong and push the borrowing out, but often there are negative consequences to that. And I think that was all that I wanted to mention from the report itself.
Any questions for our Director of Finance? Councillor Thorburn. Don't forget to push your microphone button.
I've got it on.
All right, perfect.
I'm one up. Anyway, Kim, the term is a maximum of 15 years based on, that's as
Yes,
far as we can go.
we have a debt policy that
Sure.
we try not to go beyond 15, but there may be instances where we might recommend 20 years. But currently 20-year debt had a balloon payment at 15
Sure.
years, and you have to refinance. And there is some interest rate risk in doing that. So we haven't gone that avenue yet.
Yeah, my question is, the term shows 15 years, 10, 10, 15, and 7. What actual years are we in? If that bucket truck's got 7 years, are we in year 2 with that payment? Are we in year 3? Because we had that bucket truck for a couple of years.
Nope, the bucket truck was just new in
Just new
22,
this year?
23.
Okay.
Like in last fiscal year, but we kind of have to wait for
That's just-
all the assets to be completed to borrow.
So that's the same thing with all those then? This is the first year for all of them?
This is the first year for all of those.
Okay.
Yes, the decorative lighting was a multi-year project, but
Yeah.
it was completed in 22, 23.
Okay, no, I knew some of that stuff, but I didn't know why we didn't. That's good answer. Thank you.
Any other questions? Looking for a motion? Someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor McDonald?
Move that Town Council, oh, is it on? Yeah. Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater hereby pass the resolution for pre-approval of debenture issuance subject to interest rate in the amount of $1,986,686 as presented in document 23-135.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Thorburn. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. 9.4 is donations to the South Shore Fieldhouse Society. So just a reminder for the public that people can come into the town and make a donation on behalf of HB Studios Fieldhouse and the Fieldhouse Society, and get their tax receipt, and then the town then issues that out to the Fieldhouse. So I do know every now and then I have people say, well, a bunch of times a year you give a donation to these groups. We're not. We're actually giving them money that people have donated to them. Someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Caldwell, thank you.
I move that council approve a grant in the amount of $1,500 to the South Shore Fieldhouse Society for the multi-use facility on Glen Allen Drive from funds in the designated community fund, South Shore Fieldhouse Society.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Conklin. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. 9.5 is our discussion session briefing notes, and so just a reminder to the public that all the documentation that we have here is also available on the town website. So all our briefing notes from the last meeting are here, where we discussed our solar photovoltaic feasibility study, which was quite interesting, and it went through a number of sites and kind of ranked them where it would work and where it potentially wouldn't work. So again, all that documentation is on the town website under council, and then you can see council agenda, and it's all there. Okay, our next item is 9.6, reserve, our transfers for 22-23.
The report is summarizing essentially any reserve transfers that staff are recommending that weren't in the original budget or that were significantly different than what was in the original budget. And some of these will be discussed in the financial statement presentation later. And so they all relate to the fiscal year 22-23 that we just completed. So a couple of items to highlight, the operating surplus. So the town's general operating fund had a surplus of $1,632,561, and so we're requesting to transfer that to the undesignated reserve for future use. In addition to that, Energized Bridgewater actually had a deficit from their operations of $44,000. However, it's more a result of the timing of their grants. So they have grants from prior years in reserve, and we're requesting to use $44,045.92 of that. In addition, the wastewater betterment charges are collected each year, and then staff determine what projects are going to be needing that funding. So at the end of each year, we take those betterment charges and recommend they be transferred to the betterment reserve, and there's $90,216.54 to be transferred there. Police operations had an additional surplus beyond what was anticipated of $245,000, and that's being recommended to add that to the police reserve as well. So making the transfer to police reserve $445,000 this year. In addition, we received a PTAP grant for transit of $25,000, and when it's unused, which is the case this year, we're required to keep that in a reserve for future transit use. So that leaves the transfers to operating reserve from the town at $1,948,732.07. In addition to that, there is one transfer to capital reserve that would require council approval as well, and that's from the proceeds of sale of capital assets and land. So whenever the town sells those assets through the surplus sale or property sales, the province requires that those funds be transferred to a capital reserve. And the proceeds this year related to that are $341,463.12. And again, some of that is kind of stealing the thunder from the financial statements later, but those are the key items that would require council approval to finalize the financial statements.
Kind of went through this with our audit committee meeting 45 minutes ago. If there's no questions, is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Thorburn, he loves these long motions.
Anyway, I would move that town council for the town of Bridgewater approve transfers to the operating reserves of $1,948,732.07 and capital reserves of $341,463.12 as follows. Operating reserves. Operating surplus transfer. The town is required to transfer the operating surplus to reserve fund. Due to the change in the scope of the interchange project, recommend transfer to reserve for exit 12A, $1,632,561.45. 2, Energized Bridgewater deficit. To transfer from Smart Cities Reserve to fund operations to March 31st, 2023, $44,045.92, and that's a minus. Not a minus. Number 3, wastewater betterment charges. Council approved new wastewater betterment bylaw fees charged and unused are transferred to the reserve fund at year end of $90,216.54. Police transfer. The Police Commission's operating budget included a transfer to reserve of $200,000. Due to a surplus, we are recommending an additional $245,000 be transferred to reserve for a total of $445,000. Transit funds. PTAP grant received of $25,000 and unused at year end required to be held in a reserve, recommendation to be put in the Transit's operating reserve for future use, $25,000. Total operating reserve, $1,948,732.07. Capital reserve proceeds from sale of assets. The town is required to transfer the proceeds on disposal of the physical assets to capital reserve fund, $341,463.12. Capital reserve total, $341,463.12. Total reserve, $2,290,195.19.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Caldwell. Further discussion?
Question.
Councilor McDowell, you had a question? Oh, sorry. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. We're down to reports from the audit, recommendation from the Audit Committee and approval of financial statements ending March 31st.
Okay, me again. So I'm just going to go through some highlights of the financial statements. I know that the slide presentation is being displayed, hopefully, but reminding that anyone watching, the financial statements are included in the agenda package. My slides presentation only shows excerpts of certain pages of the financial statements, so you won't see those in the presentation. So I'm just going to dive right in. So on page A4 of the financial statements, I just wanted to note that our cash position is quite a bit higher than the prior year, and it's a result of the general operating fund surplus of $1.6 million that was just reported in the prior report. In addition, just a couple of things to highlight as well. We have a long-term debt of $9.9 million. And just wanted to note that that's made up of a couple of things. That's $2.3 million of financing of some capital assets that we completed in fiscal 22-23. But in addition to that, we received an advance from FCM of $2.4 million that are going to be used to fund the low interest PACE loans for residents to do home upgrades. And so just wanted to ensure that everyone realized that that significant increase in the long-term debt wasn't completely related to capital assets, but some related to those the advance for PACE loans. In addition to that, we have a new liability on the financial statements called asset retirement obligation, and that's a result of new accounting standards requiring the town to acknowledge and account for future remediation of things like lead and asbestos and things like that. That was new this year, and so that estimate was prepared by staff and reviewed by the auditors. In addition, you'll note too that under in the capital assets section, you'll see work in progress, $11,485,000. I just wanted to point out that that's for capital projects that are not complete at March 31st. So for example, Pump Station 11 is a significant project with significant construction completed at that point in time, but because it wasn't complete, it gets accounted for here. And once it's complete, it'll get added to the tangible capital assets and amortized over its useful life. I also wanted to note on page A21, when I talk about the asset retirement obligation, and we recognized a new liability for that, also we have a new asset for that. So you'll see an increase in our tangible capital assets of $164,000, in addition to the $6 million of capital additions that we had for the year. On the income statement, which is page A5, just a couple of things to note there. Our tax revenue is significantly over budget. Part of that, or most of that, relates to D-transfer tax. So we had budgeted $600,000 for D-transfer tax, and it came in at $1.1 million. A large portion of that overage was related to strictly the sale of one property that was not anticipated, so it couldn't have been foreseen that we were going to be that much over. I also noted that residential tax revenue was within budget, but quite a bit higher than the prior year, and that was a result of assessment increases on properties in the town. Also, to note under sales of service, protective services, earlier in the reserves presentation, it was noted that the police had a surplus, an additional $255,000 of revenue, which created that surplus and needed to be transferred to the police reserve. There's some additional, just smaller amounts of revenue that were over and under budget, and you'll see some notes on this slide about those. The biggest being return on investment, which is essentially the interest income earned on our bank balance, which was a bit higher, and with rising interest rates, we benefited from higher income on our GIC and bank accounts. And the last item to note on the revenue side is on page A30. You'll notice that the grant funding from federal and provincial governments, or mainly the provincial government, is quite a bit, the budget is quite a bit higher than the actual. And that's a result of that budget being for capital projects which weren't quite completed at year end, so we don't obtain the grants until those projects are done. And so there's a delay there, but when those capital projects are completed, the revenue will be received. On the expenditure side, just a couple items to highlight. Under general government services, there were some projects which didn't get completed, a number of them for smaller amounts, which essentially resulted in those accounts being under budget. I won't go through them in detail, but there are notes on the slide. And under environmental development services, again, some projects which weren't completed under environmental planning and zoning. And I also wanted to mention the other environmental development services, because these are consolidated financial statements. The Smart Cities project is reflected in that line, and that's why the budget looks significantly higher than the actuals. It's just timing of those project costs. On page A25 of the financial statements, you'll see disclosure of the elected officials in CAO as well as their expenses for the year. And the expenses can be seen on the town's website in quarterly reports that get posted there. So that's our consolidated financial statements that the auditors look at. In addition to that, we have non-consolidated financial statements that are prepared primarily for use of council staff and the province. And so just a couple of things that I wanted to note there. So on page B2, you'll notice the transfer of current year surplus near the bottom of the $1.6 million surplus, and the annual surplus is showing as zero. So what happens is the province requires, if the town has an operating surplus, it has to put that in its operating reserve, bringing its surplus or deficit to zero for the year. So you'll note that there, and we talked about some of the reasons for that, which were de-transfer tax being over budget, interest income over budget, and some vacant staff positions and projects being deferred until future years, which created the surplus. The general capital fund, there we already looked at a lot of these items because they were related to, also reflected in the consolidated pages, but it just added some notes there related to debt and so on. To note, at year end, so at March 31st, 2023, the operating reserves had a total fund balance of $13.4 million, so about $2 million higher than the prior year, partially as a result of the operating surplus, the police surplus, and the other transfers into reserve during the year that were budgeted. In addition to that, the capital reserve has a total fund balance of $4.2 million. That includes 1.4 of gas tax money. We're required to hold gas tax money in reserve until it's used as well. And those funds are earmarked for existing projects. So our general capital reserve has a balance of $2.7 million when you exclude that gas tax reserve. In addition to that, just wanted to note the special purpose tax reserve, which has a balance of $389,000 at year end. And that we're projecting that the last year for the special purpose tax will be the fiscal year 2027-28. So that is all of the things that I wanted to highlight for the financial statements. I also wanted to note that there's a special set of financial statements just for the Smart Cities project, which is required as part of their funding agreement. And the town has trust funds, which we hold for things like the cemetery and so on. So there's a separate set of financial statements for those. And I could certainly answer any questions, but those are mostly scholarship and cemetery trust funds.
Any questions from council on those? Big thanks to you and your team working with our auditors to go through these and make sure everything's correct and done properly.
Yes, I guess we could note the auditors were present at the audit committee meeting, and we do have clean audit opinions that will be attached to the financial statements once they're approved by council. So
Perfect.
we didn't have any concerns as a result of that meeting.
Excellent. Any other questions, Councillor Thorburn?
Just one, that special tax for the LCLC, how many years have we actually taken off that from what we had proposed? Is it 1 year or 2 years sooner than expected? Or do you
Always
know?
hit me with a question I don't know the answer to. I think that year, I think we've cut at least 2 off, with 27, 28 being the last year we'll have to charge it. There certainly will be debt payments following that, but there'll be enough in the reserve to cover those next couple of years of payments.
I think that's good news for all of our residents. It will certainly help, so thank you.
I know I get, on that topic, I get questions from time to time, how come we're still paying ours? And it's just a reminder to folks that the town funded the physical building of the library. So that was a component that we funded on our own. So while the LCLC is 50-50 joint partnership with the Municipality District of Lunenburg, we were solely responsible for the funding of the library, which added a substantial capital cost, which is why ours is a little bit longer. So, but library is vital to this community, and so I don't think there's much debate over the importance of having it there and why we funded it. So, any other questions? If not, is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Conklin.
I move that Council for the Town of Bridgewater endorse the recommendation of the Audit Committee and approve the audited consolidated financial statements for the Town of Bridgewater, the unaudited non-consolidated Town of Bridgewater financial statements, the audited Town of Bridgewater trust funds, and the non-consolidated audited financial statements for the Smart Cities Challenge project for the year ended March 31, 2023, as presented.
Excited. Okay, keep forgetting to turn my own microphone on. So, moved by Councillor Conklin, seconded by Councillor McDonald. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Down to 9.8, Exit 12A Waterline Loop on Connector Roads. You get all the fun stuff.
I know, it's fun. So with the flooding that we had in July, and I think council's aware, we had damage to a water line on King Street that was attached to the pedestrian bridge by Vino Road. And that caused us to have to close that section off, shut it off of valves and redirect it. And at that time, staff determined that we needed to do some water modeling to understand what the impact of that was by not having that line continue through across that brook, what the impact would be to the town and its water services. And from that modeling, it became apparent that that line's critical in terms of ensuring that the reservoir maintains an appropriate level of water for both providing potable water as well as providing fire flow. The pressures required for that. And we do have a temporary water line that we reinstated there until we can come up with a permanent solution working with Department of Public Works on the Vino Bridge. While we did that modeling, we also had a look at the Exit 12A area, just to understand what impact that would have on that as well. And what became obvious and apparent, as we knew all along, was that the waterline loop at Exit 12A is imperative to ensure mitigate risks associated with the supply of water, both from a potable as well as a fire flow perspective. So when Exit 12A project was planned, the Logan Road closure and the interchange were actually almost aligned in terms of timing. In fact, the interchange may have been completed before there was a necessity to close off the Logan Road. So the water line loop would have been there. And what's happened since that time have been things that have affected the project timeline that have been out of the control of the province, who's project managing the construction of the civil works out there. COVID just stopped things completely for a bit. That impacted supplies, that impacted contractor availability. So the project, and as every time council asks, when's it going to be done? It just keep moving out. So we're now looking at the 24-25 fiscal year if we're fortunate to see it open by then. But what we do know is that Logan Road has been closed and the line will be severed. So we need to, based on the most recent modeling we got, it became apparent that we need to close that gap. And that was not as apparent in the original water modeling we had. But at the same time, they were both kind of aligned in terms of when they were supposed to be completed. So we met with the project managers, which is Public Works and Engineering, to discuss how can we close that gap in timeline between when the water line loop is reinstated by having the water line go across the interchange and down the St. Philip Street connector road to loop back to St. Philip's to create that loop, that continual loop. And the solution is to expedite the water line work. So if you're out near the interchange area, you'll see that there's lots of construction going on. The connector road is in the process of being built. By expediting the water line, we'd be saying put that in first. So delay storm, delay sanitary, put the water line in, and then do those other works, and remove the laterals. The laterals were really kind of just a shot in the dark. If they're in the wrong place, they have to be taken out. So we don't know where the lot lines are going to be at this point in time, so it was really a waste. In fact, sometimes we find that they're undersized for the use, all kinds of reasons why they probably shouldn't be there in the first place. To expedite the water line, given that the tender's already been issued and awarded by Public Works, they met with the contractor to see what would be involved in moving that piece ahead. And essentially it would add an additional $130,000, because that's what it means in terms of dollar value to expedite that. It closes that gap, and our water treatment staff and engineering staff feel that it's critical that we do close that gap, because that means we close the risk. So what does it mean in terms of timeline? If everything aligns perfectly, and we know that with construction projects, nothing ever aligns perfectly, for especially a $52 million project, there's always going to be things that come up that you have to kind of adjust to. But if everything aligned, they felt that they could probably have that in by the end of November. But they can't guarantee that date, and rightly so, because we're working with ground, right? And there's things that we just may not be aware of that could affect that timeline. But what we do know is that it'd be definitely sooner than if we didn't expedite it. So the recommendation from staff is that we expedite that to close that gap and reduce that risk that the town would be exposed to. Right now, the town, in terms of our contribution to this project, is $11.3 million. And if you remember, that's both in kind and cash. So in kind is essentially the civil works that we're doing. The sewer, the water, like those things we're paying for, right? But then there's also and other things that would be a cash contribution as well. So it totals 11.3, and this would add another $130,000 to that cost. So you may ask, is there a savings by taking out the laterals? Because you would think that there would be a savings by doing that, but there's actually a restocking fee. The province is prepared to absorb that cost, and so that doesn't really benefit us a whole lot. So as I indicate, the recommendation from staff and we have already consulted with council on this informally, but this is to formalize that, is that council authorize the unbudgeted costs associated with revising the scope of work for the connector roads and underground utilities by expediting the water line loop at exit 12A along the interchange and a connector road, and that's estimated to be $130,000.
It's important to note that we are in constant contact with the province with this project. It's a huge project, huge. And that we've listed off the benefits over and over again, so we don't need to go into all of that. But we're still a small town. We're still a town of approximately 9,000 taxpayers and 450 businesses that services 45 to 50,000 people. And so we have a lot of costs and a lot of infrastructure that, we're looking to the province and the federal government to assist us with, because they're regional, provincial, national, or in this case, international, entities. And so we can't do this on our own. So those are big numbers. It's not, we don't have a lot of single projects that are over $10 million. So I know it's a lot, but it's important. But we're constantly looking for some additional supports from the province and the federal government, and so the public's aware that the council has been, councilors as a group and individually have been saying, like, okay, we need more help on this. So we're all 7 of us are with staff are pushing for some more supports. So, are there any questions on this? Is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor Conklin.
I move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater approve the unbudgeted costs associated with revising the scope of work for the connector roads and underground utilities by expediting the water line loop at exit 12A along the interchange and the connector road in an amount estimated to be $130,000.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Caldwell. Further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Well, you notice how the mood just changed? Went through the exciting financial statements, and then we get to this, and we're all kind of like, Okay, so let's kind of bring it back up here as we talk about our 2023 Representative Volunteer Award recipient. And so I'm going to let Councillor Thorburn talk about our recipient, because he was kind enough and gracious enough to go and attend the event today in the city, because today was the provincial event. So, Councillor Thorburn.
Yes, Your Worship. I actually had the privilege to attend the 49th Provincial Volunteer Awards held at Cedar Event Center in Halifax, in Clayton Park area. And each year, each municipal unit sends a representative in. They honor individuals, teams, or groups that have made an accomplishment to their different areas. And it was quite a large crowd. So this year, the Town of Bridgewater's award went to Ann Jodry. On top of her volunteering at the church for decades and helping others when she can, she's also been an amazing volunteer for the Health Services Foundation for the South Shore for the past 6 years. And her volunteering with the hospital certainly predates this. She has helped with many fundraisers and served on numerous committees. Ann is a volunteer who truly cares about the cause she is supporting and the people she interacts with. Bridgewater and the South Shore as a whole are better off thanks to Ann Jodry's considerable volunteering efforts. And I might also add, we talked going in that her and her daughter were talking many years ago, and has made 62 blood donations.
Wow.
They made some agreement. So she's quite a lady. It's a privilege to go in and represent the town with her, and she was very honored to be chosen, Your Worship.
Well, a huge thank you on behalf of the community to Ann Jodry, and congratulations to her. And council will be recognizing her at a future council meeting as well. And again, thank you to Councillor Thorburn for being her date to the awards, if you will. It's quite something if you've ever been to the provincial award ceremony and you just look around the room and see how many communities are blessed with the volunteers that they have, so thank you again. Okay, we're down to business arising and unfinished business, and this is an item that we gave notice to at our last council meeting, and so regarding our personnel policy, so I'll turn it over to the CAO.
So the amendments are to Article 7, salary administration and personnel policy. And the amendments essentially amend the job classifications. So presently, the town has classifications and positions based on a set of criteria. And that criteria looks at things that must require implement it and those types of things. So we do recognize that there may be the need to look at the policy and make revisions to it to ensure that we maintain that fairness and provide for I guess that we're equitable in how we do that. So this is looking at creating a classification 6A. And this is in recognition of the need within the organization to have a grouping for those positions that are in high demand, as well as have educational requirements or skill requirements that are a little different than the grouping in 6A. So this is a grouping that would be in between the manager and the director. So it would reflect positions that have a highly competitive labor market, a high level of skill and accountability, while not having the full responsibility that a director would have. So it's a placement in between. So you can see that when you look at the amendments, we essentially took grouping 6 and 7 and kind of broke that up and made 6A. And so any positions that fall within the scoring of 761 or 820 would be placed into that grouping. And that grouping would have a salary range that would go with that, as do all groupings, and that salary range would be $98,353 to $122,937, and there's 9 steps within each range. And per the policy, those are adjusted every year based on CPI. So presently, there's one position that would warrant that reclassification into this new grade. And so there would be a small budget impact of around $3,500 to accommodate that within this fiscal year, given that we're more than 6 months, or we're 6 months into the fiscal year. So the recommendation is that council approve the amendments to the personnel policy, Article 7, salary administration, to establish grade 6A with the accompanied salary range as set forth.
Any questions from council on that? I know it's still a very competitive market. Is someone prepared to make a motion? Councillor McDonald, thank you.
I would move that Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater approve the amendments to the Personnel Policy, Article 7, Salary Administration, to create a grade 6A with an accompanying salary range as set forth in the proposed amendments contained in document 23-121, effective upon approval.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Thorburn. Further discussion? Question being called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. And we are at the end of our agenda. We do have an in-camera meeting following this under the Municipal Government Act for contract negotiations. And then we have a discussion session next week, but it is on Tuesday, as Town Hall will be closed on the Monday for a Truth and Reconciliation event. So without further ado, can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Thorburn, seconded by Councillor McDonald. We are adjourned. Thank you.